I am Wallace, and I'm an alcoholic. And if you have any complaints about your speaker tonight, see Daniel. I walked in the door expecting to come on up here and have a seat, and he stopped me back there and said, "Will you do me a favor?" I said, "Yeah." And then he gave me the bad news. and your bad news. But I'm grateful for any opportunity I have to be of service. I was laying in bed Tuesday afternoon on the couch, getting ready to have a little nap, and my phone rang. And it was Michelle from the archives desk, General Service Office. She was calling to extend to me an invitation to share at the International Convention in Atlanta Friday afternoon, July the 3rd of this year. And if I said yes to that, why should I have said no to Daniel when he asked me to speak before my home group? It's harder for me to talk before a home group than it is anywhere. I don't know why that is. I guess it's because you really and truly have to be honest and you can't lie. But I'm supposedly standing up here sober, in my right mind, my fly zipped up, and I'm going to do the best I can to share with honesty and open-mindedness and a willingness to let people know that through the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, sobriety can be obtained and maintained down through the years if we go through the process of recovery and keep on doing it a day at a time. I haven't graduated from AA, and I don't intend to. I keep on intending to put one foot in front of the other, doing what I can to be of maximum service to God and to the people about me. And that's one of the reasons that I continue to go into the correctional facilities every Wednesday night. Central Prison or either Martian Correctional or some other place. And if you see me dabbling around a little bit up here like this tonight, it's because I have store-bought teeth. And I drool a little bit. I can't help it. My wife calls that slobbering. But if you see me wiping up here, it's not because I'm lusting after anybody. I'm just trying to get that syrup off my face. But it is good to be here, and didn't expect to see this bigger crowd tonight as a result of the potential for icy conditions when we leave. But we had the energy and the safety of getting here, and I believe that we'll have that in going home tonight. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Daniel said he was sort of blank in his mind. I'm going to tell you a little story that's sort of funny. I want you to laugh when I get through with it, because it sort of helped me get over the nerve. If you could see my knees, you wouldn't think that a man with this many years of sobriety would be nervous behind the podium. But I am always nervous when I first get up. And I just can't help it. But I want to tell you a story about a drunk that was walking up the sidewalk. And he was staggering from one side of the sidewalk to the other. There was an embankment on the left with steps going up to a house. A Mayflower van was sitting out in the street up next to the curb, and people were moving furniture out of the house, coming down those steps, crossing the walkway, and putting it in the van. And this drunk was walking up that walkway. He was going from side to side. And one of the guys from the Mayflower company came down the steps with a big grandfather's clock on his back. And that drunk staggered into him, and that clock fell off his back, down on the street. Glass came out on the sidewalk, and the dong bell was going off in the clock. And the guy that was carrying the clock looked at that drunk, and he said, "You're the drunkest son of a gun I have ever seen. Why don't you watch where you're going?" And the drunk said to him, "Why don't you wear a wristwatch like everybody else?" Okay. All right, that's enough of that. I am an alcoholic, and I've known that I've been an alcoholic for many years. I knew back in my free days before I was incarcerated, I knew for several years that I had a drinking problem. I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I don't remember hearing the name called alcoholic. But I do know that when I drink, I'm one of those guys that became totally unpredictable. I didn't know where I would go, what I'd do, what kind of trouble I'd get into, where I'd leave my car, where I'd steal something, insult somebody, or assault somebody. I didn't know what was going to happen when I drank. But when I put one into my system, I'd lose control. And I never knew how much I would drink. And that started shortly thereafter I began drinking. And I was 20 years old when I took my first drink. I was 19 when I went into the Army. I was drafted in 1953. The Korean War was in progress. I was drafted and sent to Fort Jackson. And from Fort Jackson, I completed basic training, was sent to Fort Lee, Virginia. And in November of 1953, I was at a round and square dance in Roxborough, North Carolina, minding my own business that Saturday night, doing what I always did out in the crowd. I would stand back and watch you have a good time. I felt inferior, less than, tall, skinny, backwards, country, uneducated. I had bad feelings about myself. And I was standing at a heater there one Saturday night. I'd come out with two friends. They had already danced with some pretty little girls, and they were laughing and talking and so forth. And I'm standing back watching people have a good time. And when I looked over the door, I saw a lady come in that door, and she came over immediately and started talking to me, and I was embarrassed because I had recognized her when she walked across the floor. I'd never met her. And I had always been warned about getting involved with naughty girls. And I had an idea that this was a naughty girl. But anyway, I was a little bit embarrassed. And she suggested a few minutes later that I escort her out to the car. It might be some wolves in the parking lot. And I thought maybe it was my patriotic duty. I'm standing there with this flat top haircut, that Army OD uniform on, and all the medals on over here that I had earned that afternoon at the PX. And I thought maybe it was my patriotic duty to escort her out to the car. And I went out to the car that night, and I remember she started the old Chevrolet up and started the radio up and started the heat up, and then she threw her arm around me and tried to start me up. And I was restless, ill at ease, and discontent. I had never been involved in anything like that before. I had fantasized about such things, but I wasn't sure of what to expect. My experience with women up until that night was sort of like my being in the Army. I'd fired off a few good rounds, but I'd never been in combat. And everything went quite well. Everything went quite well that night. And I enjoyed the honky-tonk setting, the country and western music, dancing for the first time, really having a ball. I had never, ever felt normal out in the crowd like I did that night. And I really enjoyed myself and the company I was with and everything that took place. And I lay in bed about 2:30 that Sunday morning at home. I hadn't gotten in trouble. The law hadn't bothered me. I hadn't gotten in a fight. Hadn't stolen anything. And I'm laying in bed, I'm fighting off sleep. I didn't want to ever sleep again. I just wanted to lay there and relive Saturday night over and over and over. I had enjoyed every event that took place. And I knew that Mom and Dad had lied to me. My preacher brother had lied to me. They had said that alcohol was something that would send me to hell. Well, I had been in heaven on Saturday night, enjoying every moment of it after I took those few drinks. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Sunday morning at 2:30 that I had found a solution to my problem. I had found a magic ingredient that enabled me to be normal, to laugh, talk, socialize, and be a part of what was going on. And I knew that the next weekend I'd be buying my first pint of whiskey. And I certainly did. Before I got out of Petersburg, Virginia, I had a pint on the way home. And before the weekend was over, I realized that that bottle was much too small. And that became a way of life with me, drinking on weekends. Really looking forward to Friday when I get that pass and could go home or some other place and get into that jug and have a good time and become normal after a week of not drinking. And I quickly progressed into going into Richmond, Virginia, drinking during the week, drinking beer in the bars on Sunday. They sold it up there on Sunday. You could sit around and drink all you wanted to, all you could buy, and I enjoyed that. It was quite different from Roxborough, North Carolina, from where I was born and raised. And I got out of the Army after 2 years with no serious difficulties. I was very, very fortunate. I did lose my license, but that's just a minor problem. I mean, I became so accustomed to that. Well, I never did lose them. I knew where they were. They were in Raleigh. But that was the biggest problems I had during that first 2 years. I got out of the Army in '55, honorably discharged, went back to Roxborough to live. Went back to work in the same plant I had worked in before I went in the Army. And they were working 6 and 7 nights a week. I was on third shift. And I got to the point of having to work so much on Friday night and Saturday night that I thought I'd start missing a little bit. And I'd lay out on Friday night. And my little bald-headed first cousin that was my foreman would chew me out about it. One night I went in and he asked me what I was doing coming in half drunk. And I told him the liquor give out. He told me to go back home and find the rest of it. And I did. He laid me off for a week. Later on, after several more times of being hired and fired, he fired me permanently. He fired me that time because I had crawled over the fence about 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning and went out to the car and brought half a fifth of vodka into the plant where we were working. And he resented that tremendously. And he fired me. So then I went to work doing carpenter work. And it wasn't long before fall of the year come around. October of 1956. I had been in the National Guard since I'd gotten out in the spring. I'd been in the National Guard. I had also enrolled in high school. I was in the 9th grade trying to complete my high school education. And I had got my license back, but I lost them again in about 4 or 5 weeks as a result of driving under the influence. So I dropped out of school. But anyway, in October of '56, I was really in a difficult situation. I had more driving charges to be tried on, and the prosecuting attorney told my father that if I went back on active duty through the National Guard, they would not prosecute me for those charges. and I thought it was a good idea. Also, there was an old saying around home that children in the back seat can cause accidents. Well, I learned that accidents in the back seat can cause children. And my girlfriend told me that we should get married, and I told her I was in no condition to get married. She says, the condition I'm in, we better get married. So we did. But I quickly went to see the re-enlistment officer, and I signed up to go back into the Army through the National Guard. Then at Fort Jackson, they were talking about if you re-enlisted for 3 years or 6 years, you got a re-up bonus. And I went to see the re-enlistment officer again, wanting to go into the regular Army. And he said, for how long? I said, for as long as you can sign me up, and I want to go as far as you can send me. And he said, how does 6 years in Korea sound? I said, great. So I re-enlisted for 6 years. Got that re-up bonus. That was the most money I'd had in a long, long time. And I went to see a car salesman, and he had a 54 Pontiac convertible up there that a white captain wanted him to sell. She was on the way to Korea, or to Germany. I bought that car, and the salesman says, I know you don't have a license. He had already called back to Roxbury and found out. He says, well, I'll help you get a driver's license. And he drove me down to the highway patrol station, and we got a driver's license. That was in October of '56. Well, I was sent from Fort Jackson then back to Fort Lee, where I had been in an early assignment. And in March of '57, they come to get that car. I had not made any payments on it. I had been using that money to drink with. And they came to get the car, and after they walked around it and looked at it for a little bit, they talked a whole lot different. They said, maybe we can work out a deal where you can keep it. I said, no, you want it, you coming, you got it, you take it. Headlight was broken on one side, the window was broken, the seats were stained, and there were several dents in the corners of it. And it was, you know what a drunk automobile looks like. And some of you haven't. But anyway, they took it because I knew that in 3 weeks I would be leaving for Korea. And I did. En route to Korea, after I'd been on the water about 8 days and nights, I'm standing at the rail of the ship. And I got to thinking about my life, how much trouble I had been in since I had started drinking. I had never, ever been in trouble, arrested or anything at all like that, until I started drinking. And I got to thinking about how much embarrassment I brought on my family, and how many lies and how many promises I had made to them over the years. And I never could keep those promises. I had good intentions, but I couldn't follow through on them. And I was thinking about the misery I had really been in myself. And I made up my mind, in Korea, I'm not going to drink. I'm going to get myself straight. I'll probably go ahead and make the Army a career. I'm going to get myself right with this world. And I swore off, no way will I drink. And I was successful at that for 5.5 months over there. And during that 5.5 months, I was a soldier. I worked hard. I was in charge of a repair parts warehouse. Had Koreans working under my supervision. I'd change clothes at noontime in order to be neat. I'd get a haircut every Friday at 1 o'clock in order to be neat. I did everything I could to impress the company commander, the people I worked for. Warrant officer was in charge of me and the shop that I was in charge of. I was elected Battalion Soldier of the Month 5 consecutive times. A Company Soldier of the Month 5 consecutive times, and Battalion Soldier of the Month 3. He put my name before the promotion board and I was promoted to sergeant. That same Saturday afternoon at the Mama Son up on the hill at the laundry showed those sergeant stripes on my clothing. I was going down from the shower to the company area when these 3 or 4 of the sergeants from the company were going down to the NCO club. And they said, Wallace, you need to come down to the club. It's your responsibility, since you have gotten promoted today, that you buy us a few drinks. Well, I thought that made sense. If it was customary in Korea, I'd do it. So that Saturday afternoon, I went down to the club. And I sat in that club and watched those guys dance with the Korean girls. Saw them put the money in the jukebox. And I got to looking at that and thinking about how well I had done. How I was the youngest sergeant in the 13th Quartermaster Battalion. And I got to looking at those girls and I got to thinking, well, I ain't had nothing since I've been over here. And I thought maybe that I might ought to socialize a little bit with those guys. And I ordered a beer. And I sat there and drank that beer. It didn't last long. And nothing happened. So I ordered another beer. I drank it and nothing happened. I got up and danced a little bit with one of the girls. And I was beginning to feel pretty good, especially after the double shots of Old Granddad and Coke were brought to my table. To make a long story short, they threw me out of that club head first through the screen door. And that became a way of life over there. I don't recall getting back to the barracks that Saturday night. Sunday morning, there was a dresser on the right-hand side of my bed. I reached over, got a half a fifth of whiskey off that dresser, began to drink. I don't recall Sunday night. I came back to the room, went to bed. Monday morning, same procedure. On that dresser was a different jug of whiskey. I reached over and got it and began to drink. And it wasn't long before I was getting in trouble in Korea. The company commander could not understand the abrupt change in my actions and personality and attitude, and responsibility just vanished. And I started getting in trouble over that. And it wasn't long before the sergeant stripes were gone. I was back to corporal. And I was real lucky to make it back to the States in '58 with the rank of corporal. I was stationed at Fort Lee again and went back to work in the quartermaster school as an instructor in the maintenance shop. And I began having trouble there at Fort Lee. I had walked out on my wife. Number one, we had married in '56, and this was in '58 when I got back from Korea. And Mom and Dad had helped me furnish a 5-room apartment in October of '58. And I was to come home on weekends and be a husband and a father. And I couldn't do that. I'd come home and I'd drink white whiskey and bring my buddies with me, and we'd go to the dance, the pool rooms. And in January of '59, one Sunday night, I walked out of that apartment crying. I went down to the highway and stuck up my thumb. I'm hitchhiking back to Fort Lee, Virginia, crying like a baby. And when I crawled up into the front end of a Mack truck that stopped to pick me up, he asked me, he said, "Soldier, why are you crying?" And I couldn't talk with him at first. I couldn't tell him I was walking out on a wife I didn't love. Couldn't tell him I was walking out on a baby I did love. I couldn't tell him that I couldn't be a father, I couldn't be a husband, I couldn't be responsible, I couldn't buy groceries, pay phone bills and light bills. I was living to drink and drinking to live. And at Fort Lee, the problems really began to crop up. I worked as a waiter in the NCO club to get extra money to facilitate my drinking habits. And I got fired from that job because when a waiter walks down the hallway with a big tray of drinks, beer, mixed drinks, and so forth, and that waiter steps into the toilet and he takes a little sip out of this one, a little sip out of that one, a little sip out of that one, the waiter gets drunk. And they didn't want the waiter getting drunk, they wanted the customers getting drunk, so they fired me from that job. But it wasn't long after that I came out of a hotel room one Sunday morning where I had been. It was an old flop house. And I looked over and I saw a familiar face. It was the sergeant of the NCO club that had fired me. And he was coming out of the club with his secretary. He was coming out of that hotel. And I made it a point to yell at him, "Hey, Sergeant McKenzie, how you doing?" And he looked at me and his eye teeth almost fell out. And he walked over to talk with me. He said, "You're not going to say anything about this, are you?" I said, "Well, you fired me a few weeks ago." He said, "But I got another job for you." Just that quick. And he did. He said, "I want you to become manager of the NCO club swimming pool this spring, but you'll have to go to the Red Cross and take that 40-hour course." I said, "Fine, I can do that." And I went and took that course, and he made me manager of the NCO club swimming pool. Extra money. The extra money, I was able to get another old automobile. And with that old automobile, I began driving. Got caught in Richmond, Virginia, drunken driving and hit and run. And before I could be tried on that, I was caught again in Colonial Heights, 7 more driving charges. And I was having other problems other than that. The guys in the barracks didn't like me. Not at all. They accused me of coming in, slamming wall locker doors at night, falling over foot lockers. I could go in the mess hall and peep just a little puddle, and they get upset. They were not like these brave soldiers that served in Afghanistan and Iran and so forth, wherever, but they get upset. The country commander got tired of all this crap. And when the prosecuting attorney called him and said, if he is found guilty on these charges when he's tried, he's going to jail. The company commander took action. He took my record for the past 2 years and put it before a board of 12 officers. And all of them looked at that and declared that I had become alcoholically unfit for military service. And they booted me out. They booted me out the day prior to my court date. And that prosecuting attorney was right. The next day when I was tried on all this drunken driving and hit and run and careless and reckless driving charges and all that, they sentenced me to 90 days, a $575 fine and cost of court. And I had to pull 57 days of it, but I worked hard during that 57 days. I was a trustee in the jail, and I fried salty herons for breakfast. I shoveled snow. I worked in the courthouse, in the judge's chamber and courtroom, cleaning that, and they let me out after 57 days. And wife number one had already started proceedings to get divorced from me. And I had a girlfriend. I mean, she was a beauty. She was only 19 or 20 years older than I. And I was up there getting out of the jail that Monday morning, and she came out of the courthouse, came out of the car. It was parked in the yard. When she saw me come out of that door, she got out of the car and she came around back to the trunk, and she's waiting for me. And when I got to that trunk, I said, "Ruth, I'll never go to another jail as long as I live." She said, let's drink to it. Well, she reached in that shoulder bag and pulled out a pint, and I hadn't seen one in 57 days. And she handed it to me, and I broke the seal on it and took a couple of slugs out of it. I handed it to her. She spit her snuff out, and she took a pull on it. The next night, the next morning, Ruth had to come to jail to get me again. Her brother-in-law and sister had come down from Washington, D.C. to celebrate Wallace getting out of jail. And Mac had gotten drunk and was caught for drunken driving, and because I was passed out in the back seat, they locked me up. I couldn't even pass out without getting in trouble. And I lived up there with her off and on for a year. And finally, Mom and Dad wanted me to come home. They found out where I was. And I moved back to Roxburgh to move in with Mom and Dad and help them out in their old age. And I got a job again in the mill. The mill that I had been fired from many times in 56. Got a job there. I worked third shift at night. I'd stay around my father's store in their house. I'd go with them to church. I didn't run around with anybody that drank. Went to pool rooms or any place, and I stayed dry, but I sure did want to drink. Anyway, they had introduced me to a lady that was 8 years older than I, and after 5.5 months again of dryness, no drinking whatsoever, this lady thought she had me saved, and she asked me to marry her. And she had a good job, nice automobile, nice little house and 13 acres of land. I had 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts, and that ain't no bad deal. We got married, and 3 weeks later, we went to a dance. I got up that night and tried to dance with Sue. I had 9 left feet at that country western dance. When she wanted to do, I wanted to do. When she wanted to promenade, I'd lemonade or something. I couldn't dance. The music didn't sound right. And she finally went to the powder room with a friend, and that lady's husband worked with me in the mill. And he slid a glass of old granddad over to me. And when Sue got back to the table, I was ready to dance. And we enjoyed a couple of numbers. But when the dance was over, they had to wake me up at the back of the room where I'd passed out. I went out the door behind her that night, vomiting and cursing. And she went out the door crying and embarrassed. And that's just about what I put her through during 1962, a little over a year that we were married together. Many times during 1962, I tried to quit drinking, made promises to her, to my parents. I couldn't live up to those promises. I might stay dry for a few hours or a day or 2, but I could quit, but I couldn't stay quit. And I'd always start back. And after Christmas of 1963, I had been drinking for the most part during that 3 weeks. And on a Friday afternoon, I was doing carpenter work, and we got off at 2 o'clock. And I remember going up to the service station, beer joint, and I started drinking beer, and I don't recall getting home that Friday night. I don't recall getting home Saturday night, nor do I recall getting home Sunday night. Most of the weekend was a complete blackout. On Monday morning, wife number 2, she was shaking me vigorously, trying to get me to come to or wake up. She never knew which it would be. But I was coming to that morning when she shook me. And she asked me, was I going to work? And I said, yes. When she went back into the kitchen, I turned to the right to go into my restroom. And my elbow hit something on the pillow. And under that pillow was 2 pints of white whiskey. And I sat down beside that bed drinking that white whiskey that Monday morning. She came to the door to see why I hadn't come into the kitchen. And when she saw what I was doing, she walked up in front of me and she began to say some things that she had said many, many times during the past year. But this time she was speaking with more authority. And I knew she meant business. And basically she was saying I was a sorry, no good, low down drunk, all I'd ever be. And she said, when I get home from work this afternoon, I want you out of my house, out of my heart, out of my life forever. And she went on to work. And I don't recall leaving home that morning. I don't recall being there at the beer bootleg joint, but I was told that I called a taxi and went to town. Sometime later, I heard a sheriff testify at a trial that he had looked out the courthouse window that Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock and saw me on the street drunk. He was going to come out and arrest me, but the phone rang across the room. And he went over there to answer the phone because his secretary was off that day. She was not working, she was sick. He talked on the phone for about a minute, he said, and he came back to the door. When he looked out, he didn't see me. And he said he forgot about it. He figured the police would have me within a few minutes. It was an extremely cold Monday afternoon. And I've wished $10 million times that he had arrested me that Monday afternoon, because sometime during the next couple of hours is when offenses were committed that brought about my arrest the next morning. I was placed in jail, no bond was allowed. 3 weeks later, I went to court. February the 11th of '63. I had been unable to defend myself due to being on a blackout. Mom and Dad had hired a lawyer to defend me, and he could not defend me. And as a result of the judge listening to the evidence presented by the sheriff, he told me to stand. And he said, young man, for the offenses committed, I hereby sentence you to a period of natural life plus 40 years at the Exploration State Penitentiary in Raleigh. Take him away, Sheriff. 2 days later, I was handcuffed and shackled between 2 other men and carried in the walls of Central Prison. About 10 days later, I stood before a classification committee that was conducted by the associate warden, and he saw those commitment papers and the type of sentence I had. And he says, if you have any intentions or idea of ever walking outside the walls of Central Prison again, you're going to have to be a good boy. I knew I was going to be a good boy because I didn't like that place. I had never been in prison before. I had been in jail, but I had not been in prison. I didn't know what to expect. But I do recall that when they took me in the walls of Central Prison, that door had slammed behind me. There had been a feeling of relief that come over me. I knew I was exactly where I belonged. I had lost my right to live in a free society. And when that associate warden was telling me that, I knew I was going to be a good boy. I knew I was going to be a good boy. They gave me an excellent job in the classification section because I was a good typist and could do clerical work. And 3 weeks after I went to work in that classification section, the inmates took me into their confidence and told me how that some things, outside issues, were being smuggled into Central Prison. And there was an awful lot of them at that time being brought in. Alcohol was also being smuggled out of Central Prison Hospital. And if you had a little money, you could get those things. And just because I had been locked up is no indication that my alcoholism was locked up. When I had walked into the gates of Central Prison, I carried my alcoholism with me, but I didn't have a bottle with me. And at the first opportunity I had to get something, I took it. And I began taking those stuff, drinking that stuff. I got locked up a couple of times, once on suspicion of messing with some outside issues. Another time, suspicion of drinking, and I was never found guilty of those things. But I was locked up just the same. And I was invited to go to a meeting in June of '63 by a friend. And I went to that meeting. It was a crazy meeting. They called it Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a lot of free people from Raleigh coming in. And I went to that meeting. I sat in the back row, and free people would come in and share their experience, strength, and hope. And sometimes they'd hug the inmate. Some of them were talking an awful lot about love. I knew it was love already there because two jokers on the back row were holding hands every Thursday night. And I didn't want no part of it. And I continued to do what I was doing. For the next 8 months, I did that. I met Tom in '63. I heard him talk. But that's about all I did. I didn't really get close to him in '63. But February 16, '64, I'm writing a letter to my mom. I could write 3 letters a week, and I had 2 pages of a letter written to my mom. I was in the prison library. And I had not taken anything or drank anything for a couple of weeks. I was trying to get off of it again. And a so-called friend came in and gave me some things, and I swallowed them down. Within 20 minutes, completing the letter to my mom was no longer important. I went out behind the chapel, about 6 inches deep up against that wall. I had $5, plastic dollars, planted in the ground. I dug it up, and I went to the bootleg, and I went back to my cell block, and I got drunk. That Sunday night, sometimes past 8 o'clock, I'm up on the 4th floor, a 2-man cell. I came to that night after 8 o'clock. I took a look at where I was in life. I was in prison. No way would I ever get out at the kind of sentence I had. No way would anyone ever go to bat for me. I was in a hopeless, helpless situation. I couldn't get drunk and stay drunk for as long as I wanted to stay drunk, and I didn't have the money to do it. And I couldn't get sober because having your name on a prison group roster does not bring about sobriety. It takes some action other than just having your name on the roster. That was the predicament I was in. And I had been entertaining the idea of suicide for several weeks. And I thought that tonight would be the ideal time. I had enough stuff under my pillow that would give me the nerve to plunge over that railing 40 feet to the concrete below and end my wretched life. I made up my mind tonight is tonight, and I took everything I had. And I knew the door would slide open that night. That cell block door would slide open at 9 o'clock. Every night it did. I stood up at that door waiting. I was totally committed to make the supreme sacrifice and plunge over that railing. About 3 or 4 months later, one other guy did that. He was dead when the guards got to him. And but for the grace of God, it would have been me that Sunday night. I stood at that door totally committed to make that plunge. And you can call it sickness, blacking out, passing out, or whatever you choose. But I choose to believe that a loving God, in His infinite mercy, gave me one last chance at sobriety. I came to that Sunday night. There was a row of vomit from that door 6 foot back to the commode. I'm on my knees in front of that commode, and I'm crying, vomiting, gasping for breath, praying, and I pass out. Again, I came to later on in the morning, I don't know what time, and I crawled into my bed and lay there. And when I went out of the cell block the next morning to go to breakfast and go to my respective job in the print shop, The guys in the cell block on the right and on the left said, what was going on in there last night? I said, what are you talking about? They said, last night you cried out loud enough for everybody to hear you. God, if you help me get back to AA, I'll try. And when I went back to the next AA meeting, I didn't sit down at the back of the room. I went up and got on the left-hand side of the podium, and that became my seat. I quickly joined in mopping around the coffee pot, getting up coffee cups, setting up for the meeting, putting the chairs back after the meeting. It wasn't long before I was elected to the service librarian, and then I became chairman and secretary and so forth, and I became real active in the group for the next year and a half. I became active in that group because 2 weeks after I had that suicide attempt, I talked with Tom. Tom was an alcoholic rehabilitation officer in the unit. He had many units that he was in charge of. He had 7 years of sobriety at the time. I talked with him about my problem. He gave me a copy of the big book, the second edition of the big book, and told me what I needed to do with it. For the past 2 weeks, I've been taking those little pamphlets back to my cell block, reading those. But this is the first time I've gotten into the big book. And I was absolutely stunned to learn that I had been an alcoholic since I was around 20 years old. That was a real promotion for me, considering some of the things that I had been called down through the years. And you can imagine what they were. But I really and truly got into that book, and I began to try and apply the steps to my life. I worked 1, 2, and 3, and I quit because that's all I heard the people talk about. And this went on for a year and a half, and all during that year and a half, I would have an obsession to drink. And I'd do what they told me to do. I carried a grapevine in my pocket. I'd read it, and the obsession would leave. I'd go and talk with another inmate. The obsession would leave. I'd pray. The obsession would leave. And I finally went to Tom again and talked with him. And he said, what you need to do is start back at step 1 and start all over. And I did that. And I went through that process of recovery, 1 through 12. And I know that it was a result of that process of recovery that I found a way of life whereby I became absolutely free behind the walls of Central Prison. For the first time in my adult life, I was enjoying life because I was not having the problems I had had out in the community. And I was enjoying working with other inmates and working for Tom. They had opened up an AA office in April of 1966. And several guys applied for that job. And I'm the one that they had elected to serve as a full-time AA clerk. And I went into that job. Working with other inmates and working for Tom. He didn't come into the office every day. Sometimes be 2 or 3 weeks before you get that. But he'd come. If he didn't come, he'd call. And I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. The riot came about, I've got to tell you this, the riot came about April 17th of 1968. I'm in the office working one afternoon about 3 o'clock. Tom was over at the Honor Grade building, and he called over to the office. And he said, do you know what's going on over there? I said, no, what are you talking about? I said, I've been in the office all day working, and I went out just a short time for lunch, and I came right back. He said, well, there's a sit-down strike going on. I said, I don't know anything about that. And later on, I was preparing some paperwork for a guy that was to sit on a panel meeting, getting some notes together for him. And I I had all those notes prepared, and I went down the steps and out the door. And when I walked out the door with those notes to look for the guy, a guard was standing on the steps. And when I came out the door, he put a padlock on the AA office door behind me, the steps to go up to it. I went out and I gave up on the idea of looking for the guy. But I found out that the sit-down strike was turning into a riot. It won't but a little bit until I saw some guards come out that had Louisville Slugger baseball bats in their hand. They surrounded the PX or canteen so that guys wouldn't be breaking into it. And it wasn't long before the Central Prison guards were being moved down to the industrial area, and other guards from over the state were being brought into the backyard of Central Prison. And every one of them was carrying a baseball bat. And several of us AAs saw what was fixing to happen. The clothes house was burning by this time. Guys had gotten in there and got other clothes. They found 3 or 4 dresses in there, and some of them were parading up and down the street there with their dresses on, and smoke coming from the closed house. The chaplain was set on fire 2 or 3 times, and some of the inmates would always put it out. And then I saw people getting up on top of the prison, and you could see them up there with the shotguns and rifles. And it was 5 or 6 of us figured that if we got in this little corner there, we'll be safe. We couldn't really not let the other guys know that we were participating in the riot, but we didn't want to participate in the riot, but we wanted to be safe. And we gathered in that little corner. Well, later on that night, there was an alleyway here, and the guards moved in. They had the riot gear on, and they had the German Shepherd dogs, and the nightsticks and baseball bats. And they ran us out of that corner, across the street, in behind the chapel and the clothes house where the other guys were. Later on, someone gave a signal, and the shotguns went off, and the guards moved in with the dogs. The gas canisters fell. One gas canister hit a guy right near me in the side of his head, and it stuck into his head and killed him instantly. And they gave an order to fall down, lay down. I lay down. And when I lay down, a gas canister went off next to me, and I pulled my jacket up over my head where I couldn't see. I could keep the gas out of my face. And then I felt a baseball bat hit me in the back, and then on the head, and in the face. And they took the foot and turned me over and was telling me to get up. And there was such a numbness in the side of my face. I didn't know at the time that there were 3 bones in my face here broken. They were telling me to get up, and I couldn't get up. The highway patrol came into the west gate, right up in front of where I was laying. And they made the guards quit beating on me and let me up. I don't remember ending up in the hospital, but I know that later on that morning, I was laying in the corner of the hospital, and it was about 100 guys up there in that hallway waiting to be treated. 7 were already dead. And Tom and a sergeant or Captain Garrison, I'm not sure which one, were looking for me. I believe it was Garrison. Anyway, they were looking for me, and they found me and picked me up and carried me to the emergency room. When a guy died, they moved him out of the bed and moved me into it. And I stayed in the hospital 3 weeks. This is Tom's story here. I don't remember it. But he said that the next morning he had figured that I probably wouldn't make it through that night. But he said the next morning when he came in the hospital to see me, he saw that little Serenity prayer card up on my windowsill. And he knew I was going to be okay. About 3 weeks after that, I got the chance to look into a mirror at my face. And my face here was swollen out so far you could not see my ear or my eye. It was so big, such a big round ball, almost like a softball. And it took me a long time to get over it. My hip had a strap muscle broke. I limped for about 13 months. And when I got able enough to go back to work, the AA service job was gone. When I went back to work, I was given the job as clerk for the doctor that was in charge of the hospital. And I was sleeping in a dormitory over there at the hospital with some other guys who were doing work. And in November, that was about June that I went to work for them. But in November, I was in the doctor's office one day, and a guard from the back hall came down, and he said, "Come on, go with me." Well, I hadn't done anything. I didn't know what was going on. They said, "Come on, go with me." And I went with him to the back hall. And I found out when I got to the back hall that V. Lee Bounds, who was the director of the prison, I'm in A grade now. I'm in A grade. I'm not in honor grade. V. Lee Bounds had signed an order that I was to be moved from Central Prison across the fire break to work with Tom in the Correctional Center for Alcoholics as an inmate counselor in the alcoholism drug program for 30-day to 6-month public drunkenness offenders. And I worked in that program with him for 2 years before he was transferred to the Sanford Advancement Center. And then 3 weeks later, he transferred me up to be working as, I forget what to call it. It was sort of like a peer counselor at the Sanford Advancement Center. Anyway, I eventually worked 3 years there. Tom had Waylon Collins as the assistant superintendent, and when Tom was transferred to Moore County to be the warden of 3 institutions down here, Waylon was made warden of the Sanford Advancement Center. And I went to work with the phone company there after I had been up there for 3 years. And in 1981, as a result of some people in Sanford, as a result of a male member of Alcoholics of Al-Anon going to bat for me and getting some letters written, over 500 letters went in to Governor Hunt saying we would love to have Wallace, a member of our society, and living here in Lee County. And Governor Hunt believed those people, commuted that time down to 35 years, whereby I could be paroled. And on June the 1st of 1981, I was paroled. I was paroled because I had wife number 3 I had been married to for 3 years. She married me at the Sanford Advancement Center. They had given me permission to build a home while I was in prison at the Sanford Advancement Center the last year I was there. And I got out on parole. I had that to go to. And one day, 5 years later, I came home from work with the phone company. I got up to the carport. My wife was standing there. And I parked my car and I walked down to the mailbox to get the mail. I came back up. And my wife saw me crying when I came up the driveway. and I was reading a letter. When I got to the carport, I handed the letter to her. It was from the parole board. And it said, "Congratulations, Mr. Brown. You have completed your obligation to the state of North Carolina. You've done it with dignity and respect because you've had a different way of life since you have been in recovery for the past 17 years that I had been in AA." It says, "Congratulations. You are now a free man." And Bobby Jean read that letter. And she said, "I don't see anything in here that should make you cry." I said, "That letter's wrong in one respect. That letter says that I am a free man." I said, "That is not true so far as that letter's concerned." I said, "I've been a free man since 1966, after I had taken step 5 and got into the other steps of the program, and God had removed the obsession I had to drink. I had become a free man back then," and I told her this. I said, "This doesn't make me a free man." I said, "What this makes me is that they are turning me loose from supervision. That does not make me a free man. But I am free of the bondage of alcoholism today, free of the bondage of self, and free because I know what a little happiness and peace and serenity is all about. I know how to stay sober. I love you people. Wish I had more time, but I don't. Thank you."